Before I get into this video, I just want to give you guys a brief warning that the episodes I'm about to talk about contain strobing lights. I know that the War Games contain strobing lights in its colorized form and in its original black and white form. The story The Daleks, I'm not sure about, but it might. But if you're going to check those out, just keep that in mind if that's something that affects you. Anyway, thank you. On with the review. Well, boys, what do we have today? This is going to be an interesting one, because I'm reviewing something which probably not a lot of Doctor Who fans have seen, but is in fact available in the United States. Again, something that's not heavily advertised. This is going to be the War Games in color. So, if you don't know, a while back, the BBC colorized the original story, The Daleks, from 1963. And they did eventually release that on iTunes in the States. So I was able to watch that. But in that case, that was a colorization of something that I had already seen the original version of. And I think the whole idea with colorizing the Daleks was to try to get younger viewers to watch Classic Who. And by the way, I'm going to go into full spoilers for basically both of these things because I'm going to be comparing them a little bit. But so that's going to be full spoilers for the Daleks and the War Games. But basically, when I watch the Daleks in black and white, the way I watch Classic Who usually is to watch one episode every day when I'm watching a story. I don't watch them back to back to back because, frankly, the pacing is very slow, and you will get burned out doing that, in my opinion. Some people who watch Classic Who are sort of overachievers, and they watch a few episodes at a time, or even try to watch the whole story in one day. And I applaud them for that if that's what they want to do. But I personally think that these stories have kind of diminishing returns when you watch multiple episodes a day, because there's a lot that goes on, and a lot of it is kind of a repeat of some things that happened in the last episode, as in getting captured and released again. And so when I watch Classic Who episodes, I tend to try to watch one of them, at least when I'm watching multiple stories, I'll only watch one episode from every story, and then the next day, when I've had a full refresher of a 24-hour period, basically, then I'll go in and I'll watch the next episode. So that way, things that are repeated won't bother you as much, and you won't feel bogged down by so many details. That's essentially my approach to watching Classic Who. So I found it very interesting when I realized, or when I heard that they were going to be colorizing some classic episodes, because when they colorize these episodes, they severely cut down the time. So the Daleks, the classic Doctor Who stories essentially are 25 minutes, but I consider them basically half-hour episodes when I'm calculating the time. So the Daleks, I think, is 6 or 7 episodes. So that's roughly 3 to 3.5 hours. And they cut it down to, I think, less than 2 hours, if not 90 minutes, 80 to 90 minutes, I think, for the Daleks. And when I watched it, I thought the pacing was okay, and that was something that I was thinking, if I didn't see this before, would I notice a lot of the stuff that's gone? And even having seen it, I didn't notice a lot of the stuff that was gone. They had some weird stuff they did with jumping back to something that you'd only seen a minute ago with flashbacks, or cutting back and forth rapidly in such a way that you could tell was different from the original way it was cut together. They did stuff like that, but none of that was too bothersome. The thing I found the most bothersome was the sound mix, because they had music that was just overpowering the vocals. I mean, music that was just way too loud, way too intrusive over the music tracks of the original, and just the talking tracks of the original as well. I thought the colorization and the effect work was astounding, was incredible on the Daleks episode, but I thought the sound mix, that was my biggest criticism of the Daleks. Well, now they've colorized the War Games. And the War Games is a little bit different for me, because this is not something that I've seen before. I have started to watch maybe the first 1 or 2 episodes of the War Games, but I've never gotten through nearly as much of it. And I think the time was still around 90 minutes, less than 2 hours for this. But instead of having 7 episodes, this one has 10. 10 episodes. And so you're trying to fit 75 more minutes into the same end result of 90 minutes. How is that going to work? Well, as a person who hadn't seen the original, I was curious about how well it was going to work for me, going in almost completely blind with this. And I gotta say, for most of the runtime, it doesn't. it doesn't work at all for most of the runtime. I mean, we're talking people get captured way too quickly, released way too quickly. Everything is happening so fast, but there's no coherence to it. There's no, like, this is the beginning, the middle, and the end. You're watching just a bunch of stuff happening that almost feels like you're watching a recap sometimes. You know, when they have those extended recaps on Netflix or Disney, whenever they release a new season of something and it's not been out for a year or something, they'll do one of those extended recaps. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching that. You're not really watching something that is enjoyable to sit back and view. You're watching something on a fast-forwarded pace. And I felt a lot of that when I was watching the War Games. Now, I want to comment too on the colorizing. I think the colorizing's quite good. It doesn't look as good as the Daleks did. And I think that's down to the fact that a lot of this was filmed outside and there's a lot more sets. The Daleks kind of had a more soundstage feel to it. It was mostly inside of a building. And even the outdoor sections, I'm not sure that all of those were outdoors. I think some of the sections in the Daleks where, like, Susan's running through the forest is probably outside. But a lot of the stuff when they're just walking around near the TARDIS, it could be inside. And certainly the stuff that was filmed with the Daleks inside of the buildings, of course, was filmed inside. So they probably had a lot more control over things like the placement of the camera and the lighting and those sorts of things that you want to happen so you can more completely control the picture. So I think it makes sense that the Daleks has a much better picture than this does. After all, they weren't filmed that far apart. I think probably the War Games was filmed in 1969 or 68, and the Daleks was probably filmed in 1963 because it was probably November or December when it came out. So I think that makes sense, but I just do have to say that the colorization isn't as good. But the pace is a problem, and guys, the sound mix problem, I hate to say it, it's even worse in this installment. Now, I say it's worse, it doesn't really drown out the dialogue as much. I can only think of maybe one or two times where that happened, where it was like, okay, I was listening to it, but if I wasn't listening super closely and I wasn't sitting close to the TV, I could see easily that piece of dialogue being missed in there. But so that wasn't as much of a problem. But the sound mix itself, I mean, I would say, just as a person who produces audio, I would do two things. Number one, you need to turn the bass down on the music track, and number two, you need to reduce the volume probably by around 20 to 25%, I'd say, at least, for the sound mix, because it's not so bad that it's drowning out the dialogue, but it is still very distracting. That sound being so loud, the music just being like blah, 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 where it feels like you're just watching a trailer the whole time. It doesn't even feel like you're watching a scene. In movies where the action picks up and the music gets really loud, you need those moments where you have the downtime. You need a long scene with no music for a while, or at least very soft music. And the downtime was not nearly as long. Everything was trying to be super exciting, and it was fatiguing. So that part I didn't enjoy. But that stuff only affected the story up until the ending. So there's two major things I have to talk about in the story that probably are also the things that people who reviewed this were speaking about. So, again, full spoilers. The first one is the whole thing with the war chief being the master. This is heavily implied in such a way that I like, because if you want to believe that the war chief is not the master, it's never explicitly added to this in a way that says, hey, this is definitely the master. But they have that music going. The dun 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 dun, they've got that going when he is talking. And they strategically place it in certain spots to better imply this. So when you first see the war chief have his most significant piece of dialogue, that's when the music starts. And I'm thinking, why did they put the Master's music there? I pay a lot of attention to Doctor Who music. I was thinking, why did they put that Master music right there? And then later, when he's revealed to be a Time Lord, and the Doctor's facing off with him, they have that Master music playing. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. I see what they're doing. I thought I had heard something about that, maybe Who Culture or someone like that put that down in one of their videos. But even if I hadn't heard that, I think I probably would have gotten that and been like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. They're implying that the war chief is the Master. And then at the end, when he is gunned down by I forget who does it, but they put a regeneration sound right there. So you can say, okay, that was him regenerating. So again, he is revealed to be a Time Lord, so even putting the regeneration sound there doesn't definitely say, oh, this is the Master. So that I rather liked. And going forward from there, from the moment that all the nonsense with the war stops, when the moment that we're no longer going back and forth between, okay, now it's this war, this person gets captured, this person gets set free, all this stuff, when the story actually slows down enough and again, I haven't seen this in the original, but when the story actually slows down enough where I'm saying, okay, now the Time Lords are arriving, now this is interesting to me, we've got the Master here, we've got the Doctor here. Now, going forward from that point, I was interested in it the whole time. So, the trial with the Doctor and the other guy from the species who I don't think is really named, I liked all of that. Before I go forward, I have to say one thing. The violence in this was actually pretty surprising to me, how violent it got sometimes. And there was a jump scare that they added with music where someone comes up behind someone else and grabs them, and they added like a boom with the music, and that actually did scare me, so that was pretty effective, I thought. So I just wanted to add that in there. But anyway, going forward from that point, I'm a lot more interested in the story because I'm now paying attention to this as a regeneration story, and we've got Gallifrey here. They've added some dramatic shots of Gallifrey, which I thought were kind of funny because they're so obviously out of place. And if they're not out of place, yes, I'm going to feel dumb for saying that, but they do seem out of place, don't they? Just dramatic shots of the Gallifreyan desert with the citadel there, and I'm like, okay. Just some external shots put there for no reason. But maybe it was in the original episode and they just colorized it and it was a model or something. I have no idea. But, so those shots were interesting. But once we see the Time Lords... And by the way, I kind of wish they would have taken a little bit of liberty here with the Time Lords. I know that later in the Three Doctors we see the Time Lords kind of wearing blue and stuff. But it would have been cool to see them in gold and red in that... trial room, that would have been, or a courtroom as it's called sometimes. It would have been nice to see them in those colors. But anyway, we've got this trial happening. We got a good scene with the Doctor saying goodbye to Jamie, and I think it was Zoe he's saying goodbye to as well. And that was nice. It was bittersweet, but I had always thought that they had their memory completely erased and that the Doctor didn't get to say goodbye. I don't know why I had thought that was what had happened, that those two had their memories erased all the way and the Doctor never really got to say goodbye to them. That wasn't the case. He did get to say goodbye to them, and they both did remember him. So, Jamie, even though he never got to see the inside of the TARDIS, which is sad, which I'm just now realizing, yeah, that is sad, actually, now that I think about that. That is sad, but he got to go back into his own time, and at least he got to meet the Doctor. So, yes, that relationship that they formed was never... Wow, I'm making myself sad about this. I hadn't thought about it. Maybe that's why people talk about that. But at least he didn't completely forget the Doctor, and the Doctor could come back and introduce himself again if he wanted to. So, that is something that was nice that it got to happen. And the Doctor did get to say goodbye. So... they find the Doctor guilty for meddling, and if you've seen Trial of a Time Lord, you probably would appreciate that as well. But there's a big, giant thing at the end of this episode, which unfortunately was spoiled for me, but it's okay. because it would have been a really big surprise if I hadn't seen it ahead of time. I hadn't seen it, but if I hadn't heard about it ahead of time. But nonetheless, I still appreciated it. Man, I'm making myself sad as I go through these things. I'm like, oh man, I like this, but I wish it would have been different. But the big thing is we get a regeneration scene from 2 to 3. And depending on how far you are into fan theories, you may or may not like this, because there is a theory called Series 6B, which says that the Doctor may have had extra adventures between the time that he was at that trial and the time we see the third Doctor fall out of the TARDIS and spearhead from space. Now, given all the stuff, and I don't want to talk about this right now, but I kind of have to now. Given all the stuff we know about the Timeless Children and Joe Martin, a lot of fans thought that maybe Joe Martin's Doctor was between the second and third Doctor, and that means that the Doctor never had the sonic screwdriver or the TARDIS before the first Doctor, being William Hartnell. So that means the Doctor had not stolen the TARDIS until William Hartnell's Doctor, and you could technically make that work by saying, okay, there's Series 6B. You can't do that if you take this as canon, but I don't really mind it, because honestly, the second Doctor to the third Doctor regeneration, that kind of just makes me think of the timeline being as it originally was, intact, and kind of disregarding the Timeless Children in general, which, by the way, if you like the Timeless Children, no disrespect, and no disrespect to Chris Chibnall, I just really don't like it, as you've probably heard me say more than once on this channel. So, I'm going to stop babbling about that and talk about the actual regeneration scene. Given what this was, the budget they had, and the resources they had to work with, I think this was pretty fantastic. And there was actually a canon joke in there that I find really funny too. And I actually kind of knew it was coming. So let me just start from the beginning. We get the TARDIS sort of zooming off in the time vortex in a cool shot. And I did rather like that. And it was obviously with some new effects. But it's an amalgamation of old and new stuff, and I don't mind that. So that was cool. We get some shots of the TARDIS console going up and down in there. We get the second Doctor sitting in the chair, and the regeneration starts. That's probably the scene right there. That's the moment that I think looks the most cheesy, probably, is the second Doctor sitting in the chair. But I don't really mind it necessarily. It would have been nicer if maybe they reused the shot of him being on the floor from the Power of the Daleks, since that is a missing episode or story completely. But anyway, he's sitting in the chair, he has the regeneration, and then we sort of get the close-up, and it doesn't look super great, but we get the regeneration from 2 to 3, and what I like is they cut back to the shot from Spearhead from space, and they even have the TARDIS making that original sort of reverse regeneration sound, and then we get the joke here as the Doctor's coming to. We see the console is flipping back and forth between 1970 and 1980, which is hilarious because the stuff with UNIT is supposed to take place in the 1980s, but the episode premiered in 1970, and I think they made some mistakes because they probably said both in the canon, that it was 1970s and 1980s, and it's flipping back and forth between the two, and I think that's really hilarious, actually. And the whole thing with, we get the close-up on John Pertwee, and he says, "Where am I?" I think it's pretty obviously John Pertwee's voice when he says, "Where am I?" But then when he goes, "What?" I think that's a different voice actor right there, as he's looking at the console. And the cliffhanger at the end is the Doctor falling out of the TARDIS, which happened at the beginning of Spearhead from Space, which is a really good bookend. And just for the icing on the cake, we get the end credits from the third Doctor's era there, sort of looking more futuristic there with some better gradients and colorization there. And I think even the titles have the yellow print like the third Doctor's era, which you may not know this, but that's my favorite Classic Who era. I have seen all of it. I've seen all 5 seasons of Pertwee's era, and I recommend that people do the same. It's very watchable. I think you can, doing what I do, going through one episode every day, you can get through that series, and it's very watchable. I think, especially with John Pertwee being such a lovable and smart aleck doctor. It's and he's very cool too. And it's the first color era. I actually think John Pertwee's era is way easier to get through than Tom Baker's era. One, because Tom Baker has some stories that I think are significantly more difficult to get through, even though he has some that some might consider better. And the second thing is, he was on the show way longer. I think he was there for 7 seasons versus John Pertwee, who was there for only 5. But anyway, having that be the bookend leading into my favorite Doctor's era, I really do like this. And also noteworthy is the fact that the War Games is the first story it's possible to watch the beginning of all the way to where we are in the current era of Doctor Who. So in other words, from the first episode of the War Games up until the most recent episode with Shudigatwa, you can watch every Doctor Who episode from that point, with none being missing. So now that I've seen the War Games, I can say that I've seen the War Games all the way up through John Pertwee's era, and then I think even into, oh my gosh, I think I'm in the middle of season 13 that I've seen all of with Tom Baker, and then I've seen a bunch more of Tom Baker's era too, just here and there. And I've seen nearly all of the 5th Doctor's era. I've probably seen all of the 6th Doctor's era, except for maybe like a couple episodes, because I've seen all of Trial of a Time Lord, and I think I saw all of his remaining episodes on the end of his first season, which maybe it was just the Twin Dilemma. And then I've seen his Cyberman story, and so maybe there's just a couple more I need to see, and I will have seen all of Colin Baker's era, and I've seen a lot of Sylvester McCoy's era as well. And the 5th Doctor, did I talk about the 5th Doctor's era? I don't know, but I've seen most of the 5th Doctor's era. I think maybe there's just like maybe 3 or 4 stories I still have to watch from his era, and I've seen the whole thing. So I'm well on my way to seeing like all of Classic Who. You know, it's kind of funny to think about that. And I've seen the Paul McGann TV movie more than once. So it's interesting to think that I've probably seen most of Classic Who at this point. Oh, I didn't really think about the 1st Doctor and the 2nd Doctor's era, did I? Did I just forget the 1st and the 2nd Doctors? That was super disrespectful. What I meant to say is I've seen most of classic Doctor Who that's in color and not missing, probably. I from that period I talked about. But I still need to see a bunch of the 1st Doctors and 2nd, because they just have a stupid number of episodes, the 1st and 2nd Doctor. Those people back then were so lucky with how many Doctor Who episodes they've got. But I am right now working on watching all of the 2nd Doctor's era, so even then, I'm probably going to see most of Classic Who in that way too. But that's my review of the War Games. What did you think of the War Games? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, thank you for watching, and allons-y.